So your mantra during the campaign, because we talked many times during the campaign, and in every interview, including this one, you talked about work, wages, and wealth. So let's
Sure.
focus in on wealth. You made your top priority is to eliminate the racial wealth gap. How are you going to
Sure.
do that in Maryland? And is that part of
Yeah.
your? Are you going to start doing that in your first 100 days?
Absolutely, we are. And it's not just a priority because it's important for a group. It's important for the entire state to understand why having a racial wealth gap in the state of Maryland of 8 to 1 is so dangerous. And we have seen reports, just recently, national reports have shown that the racial wealth gap has cost this country $16 trillion over the past 2 decades in GDP. That's not growth for a group. That's not GDP of a demographic. That's GDP. And so we've got to be able to address the issue of the racial wealth gap if we're going to watch long-term economic growth that's going to take place and be sustainable in the rest of the state of Maryland. So to do that, that means things like ensuring that we can focus on unfair appraisal values in historically red line neighborhoods, because one of the main drivers that we have of wealth in our society is appraisal values of neighborhoods, appraisal values of real estate. And if you have such a schism between how that racial wealth gap and how that appraisal value works and looks, it has a significant impact on the wealth gap. It means we've got to focus on getting people back to work and making sure they're getting paid a fair wage for the work that they are doing. So that means being able to accelerate how we're thinking about the minimum wage in the state of Maryland, where right now in the state of Maryland, the minimum wage is set to increase to $15 an hour by 2025. We need to accelerate that, particularly knowing now that we have so many people who essentially are the Alice population, the asset constrained, income limited, and also but employed. So the people who are working, in some cases working multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line. We've got to address that group. And it also means we've got to focus on entrepreneurship, teaching our children through our education system how not just to be employees, but to be employers, making sure we're focusing on an ownership society where we're increasing liquidity for our small businesses and specifically for our minority owned businesses, our women owned businesses, our veteran owned businesses. Because if you can increase liquidity to our entrepreneurs, if you can create access to capital to our entrepreneurs, and that means supporting things like our black owned banks and our MDIs, or minority deposit institutions, our CDFIs, we're going to do a much better job of creating levels and measurements of economic growth, which leads to long-term wealth. And so these are all things that we've got to focus on. And if we can do that, if we can decrease the racial wealth gap, increase economic activity, make our state more competitive while also making it more equitable, this is going to be Maryland's decade because we are going to focus on economics.